Well, we are in the fifth and final part of this series, Let's Go. And if you're a guest with us today, or maybe you missed parts 1 through 4, I just want to encourage you. Well, go to tcconline.tv, click on demand. You can watch this entire series. There are also, maybe you've been here all 4 weeks, or you have a friend or family member that needs to watch this series. Just send it to them. It's a great resource that we just always want to make available for you. Well, this entire series, we've been making our way through this Old Testament book of the Bible, a story about, Ruth. And the setting of this Old Testament story, Ruth, is, it's really dark days for Israel. It takes place during the time of the judges. And don't think about courtroom judges. These judges were tribal chieftain, like leader, warrior type of judges. At the very end of the book of Judges, which is a collection of the stories about the judges, on the very last chapter, the very last verse, we read the big idea of the whole storyline of Judges, and it gives us such incredible insight to how dark these days truly were. This is what we're told. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Remember, it was Joshua that God tapped on the shoulder to lead his people into the promised land. It was Joshua, right before he dies, he's speaking to all of Israel. He goes, hey, fear God, meaning worship God. Put God as priority number one. Obey God. God's develop a framework. Live within that framework and serve God. I mean, 3 things Joshua just says, you got to embody, you got to live these things out. Joshua dies. And then all of a sudden, it's like we turn the page and we discover, everyone did as they saw fit. It was a dark, evil, morally void time. And this is where the story of Ruth takes place. The story of Ruth is filled with tragedy. Famine had hit the land. I mean, we're not just talking a short period of time. I mean, this is a really long famine. So Naomi and her husband go to try to find work, try to find food. They go to a foreign land, Moab. While living there, Naomi loses her husband and both of her sons, one of those sons being Ruth's husband. I mean, it's filled with tragedy as they've had to move and they've had to, face incredible amounts of fear. I mean, for instance, when Naomi and Ruth decided to go back to Bethlehem, they were now widows without the protection of men, living in a time period that were really dark days. They had to face that journey by themselves. You talk about fear, but greater than just the outward fear is the fear connected with the unknown. What might happen? What could happen? All of those thoughts that swirled around within their mind, within their heart. How are they as widows, as women, how are they going to even live? But yet the story, the book of Ruth, is a story about fearing God, being in awe of God, worshiping God. One of the most Catholic moments in all the Bible is this moment where Ruth looks at Naomi as Naomi is trying to encourage Ruth to move back to Moab. And Ruth looks at Naomi and says, hey, Naomi, where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Hey, Naomi, Yahweh, God, is number one. So I'm all in with you. The story of Ruth is about obedience, about obeying God. When Naomi and Ruth enter into Bethlehem, remember, Naomi had been gone for over 10 years. The women in the town see her and they're like, is that Naomi? And her name, Naomi, means pleasant. And Naomi says, don't call me pleasant. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, bitterness. For I left full and I return empty. You see the dark valley spiritually that Naomi is in, but yet she keeps following God. We turn the page into chapter 2, and it's this moment where Ruth meets this guy named Boaz. Ruth comes home to Naomi and goes, hey, I met this guy named Boaz. And right away, Naomi gives God the praise, gives a blessing, and then says, he's our guardian redeemer. There's an Old Testament law. in place, that God put in place to care for widows. And the story, the book of Ruth, it's a story about serving. Over and over again, we see this others first mindset. Over and over again, we see the characters in the story putting each other first. Ruth serving Naomi, Naomi serving Ruth, Ruth going out into the fields, Boaz serving Ruth, Boaz serving Naomi. I mean, over and over again, it is a story about, well, others first. And when we think about what Joshua said to all the Israelites, when we think about how the story of Ruth in these dark days lived out these three things, we simply at Tri-County Church saying we're just called to love first. Because that's what loving first is. Jesus said the greatest law is to love God and love each other. Those two things are connected together. It's not one or two. It's like, no, you love God, you love people. Jesus over and over again said, hey, what does love look like? It looks like serving people. It's why Jesus scrubbed feet. He touched the untouchable. He looked at those who were overlooked. And he got on the cross out of obedience to God to serve you and me. Why? Because he loves. One of the things throughout this series I've been encouraging all of us to do is to see Jesus, the church, concealed in this Old Testament story of Ruth. Because the New Testament, Jesus, the church, is concealed in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is revealed in the New Testament. And today we have one more incredible insight that's concealed into this Old Testament story. Where we ended the story last week in part 4, the unnamed guardian redeemer had just taken off his sandal, handed it to Boaz to kind of seal the deal that Boaz is officially now the guardian redeemer of Ruth, of Naomi. And this is what we're told. The elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who's coming into your home like Rachel and Leah. Now, this is a staggering statement. Rachel and Leah were kind of the mother of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, there's 2 other concubines that were part of that storyline, but that's a story for another day. But Rachel and Leah really got the credit for the 12 tribes. And all of a sudden, they're pulling Ruth, this Moabite from Moab, that person, from that country, all of a sudden connecting her to Rachel and Leah, who together build up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Those 2 cities are the same city. They're just 2 different names of the same city. And they said, may you have standing. This Hebrew word is a really broad word that means strength. It means influence, which means prominence, and to be famous. And all of a sudden you start thinking to yourself, well, that's really cool, but that seems really big to get attached to Ruth, a Moabite from Moab. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Now, remember that, because we're going to come back to that in a few moments. So Boaz, we're told, took Ruth. She became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And the woman said to Naomi, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. But then they say, may he become famous throughout where? Not just Bethlehem, not famous just in the region of Judah. No, they go, famous throughout all of Israel. This son, born to Ruth, a Moabite from Moab. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons. That number 7 is a number that means completeness in the Old Testament. That she's better than 7 sons. That the completeness that your sons could have brought to you, she's better, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him like a grandparent for a grandchild. And the woman living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David, the famous, the mighty King David. Now, in my Bible, there's verses 18 through 22, but right before you go from verse 17 to verse 18, there's a subheading, a heading that says the genealogy of David. And I don't know for you, but so many times early on when I first started studying the Bible, I'd get to the genealogies and I would just skip through them. Why? First of all, I couldn't pronounce any of the names. Second of all, if I could pronounce their names, I had no idea the significance of a genealogy. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm just going to get to the good part of the story. So I'd just skip over. So I'd come to a section like this. I'm like, I'm just not going to read it because I can't pronounce their names. And it's just a list of names. And then I started to discover the perfect and powerful story that God scripts through genealogies. And now they get my attention. And they cause me to ask questions. So as we read through the very ending of the story, this book of Ruth, the genealogy of David, there's 4 names that I want you just to focus in on. 4 names, not to lose sight on. Got it? 4. This then is a family line of Perez. Perez is number 1. Was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Solomon, Solomon the father of Boaz, number 3. Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, number 4. Those 4 names. Now, hundreds of years later, all of a sudden a guy named Matthew shows up on the scene. I love the story of Matthew because when we first kind of meet Matthew, he's at work. And his work will cause the people around him in his community, in the culture, especially the Jewish religious people, to hate him. You see, Matthew was a tax collector. He worked for the Roman government, and, oh, by the way, he would steal from the people in the community so he could take excess money. The Jewish people literally equated tax collectors to the chief of all sinners, right? The really big sins, the really dark sins, the really bad sin, tax collectors was in that grouping. And Matthew was sitting there one day at work at his tax collector table, and all of a sudden Jesus walks up to him and his life forever changed. Jesus, knowing exactly who he was and what he was doing, looks at Matthew and says, "Come follow me." And immediately Matthew got up and started following Jesus, and you could just imagine the gossip, the whisper of all those around who cannot believe that Jesus has invited one of those people to be part of his inner circle. And Matthew's life forever changed. Years later, Matthew sat down to write the story of Jesus. We have 4 gospels. The word gospel means good news. It's good news about Jesus. We have 4 gospels in the New Testament that tell the story about Jesus. And all 4 authors tell the story of Jesus, but they have a different audience and they have kind of a different perspective attached to it. Luke comes to investigate eyewitnesses, the story about Jesus. So he interviews all these people. He just wants to make sure the story about Jesus is true. John writes from kind of this purpose perspective as one being the closest to Jesus. It's a very relationally deep kind of perspective on the story of Jesus. Mark is like the Cliff Note version. It's just all the big stories. And Matthew comes in. Again, remember, his life completely changed. He was one of those people, one of the outcasts, one of the hated, one of the despised, and Jesus invited him in. And so Matthew is now writing from that lens to a Jewish audience. So he's pulling in the Jewish Old Testament story into his storytelling of Jesus. And out of all the places Matthew could have chosen to start, you know where he chooses to start? He starts with the genealogy of Jesus. Matthew 1, verse 1. He just starts right there. Now, Luke also includes the genealogy, but he puts it in chapter 3. But Matthew does something so different than Luke. And this is where the game-changing insight is. Now, remember those 4 names that I encourage you to remember? Perez, Solomon, Boaz, David. Okay, we're going to keep those there. There's one more name that's in this genealogy that we just have to include. Why? Because it's Joseph, Jesus' earthly father. So Matthew starts to write the genealogy, and we get to verse 3, and this is what Matthew writes. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah. Perez and Zerah were twins. Now, in Luke's genealogy, he just only mentions male names. But Matthew pauses here. He doesn't continue on in the list of male names. All of a sudden, Matthew pauses, and you could just feel Matthew's entire story kind of bleeding into this genealogy. And also Matthew goes on, no. I got to include an insight. I got to include a piece of information that everyone needs to know. And he writes, whose mother was Tamar. Now in Genesis chapter 38, there's a story there. This is not, parents, this is not like young kid family reading story night. Just avoid chapter 38. But the story of Tamar is filled with abuse and neglect and dressing like a prostitute and having sex. I mean, it's one of these, messy, sinful family moments. It's one of those family secrets that never kept secret. It's one of those moments. And all of a sudden, Matthew goes, oh, by the way, Tamar. Tamar's part of the genealogy of Jesus. And if you were a Jewish person, you've been like, that's a story we just don't want anyone else to know. That's a story we don't tell. That's the chapter in the book of Bible we just skip over. But Matthew wants to highlight the fact that she's part of the story. Matthew continued on the genealogy. He writes, Nahshon, the father of Solomon. Solomon, the father of Boaz. What's interesting is we've gone through the whole story of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, and we haven't heard anything about the family, the immediate family of Boaz. And all of a sudden Matthew goes, oh, by the way, this is another insight you got to know. And Matthew pauses like, yeah, we got to tell this part of the story again. And he goes, oh, whose mother was Rahab? Who's Rahab? Rahab was a Canaanite, a pagan prostitute who was living in Jericho. Joshua was leading God's people. They sent spies into Jericho, and it was Rahab, the prostitute, pagan Canaanite, who chose to hide the spies, to keep the spies safe. And God promised that he would protect Rahab and her family because of her act of faith. And Matthew goes, you have to understand that there's a pagan prostitute that's in the storyline of Jesus. And oh, by the way, she gives birth to a son named Boaz. And all of a sudden Matthew goes, and oh, by the way, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother we all know, Ruth. Think about that insight now. Maybe you never knew this. But think about Boaz showing up to his fields that day, discovering Ruth was a Moabite from Moab, and part of Boaz's story is his mother was a Canaanite, a pagan prostitute, who God redeemed, who God saved, who God protected. And now we understand more of Boaz, why he looked at Ruth. It was like, no. Drink from the men's barrels of water. Hey, Ruth, come eat dinner with me. Here's more grain. You can tell the love and care that Boaz has for Ruth. Why? Because Boaz fully understood what God did for his mother. And then Matthew writes, David was a father of Solomon. And I love how Matthew chooses to write this next part. Whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Now, we know her name is Bathsheba. I mean, that's her name. But Matthew goes, oh, by the way, let's not miss the famous King David. King David, who God handpicked. King David, who became the man after God's own heart. King David, who wrote the majority of the Psalms, worship songs. That King David took another man's wife. And oh, by the way, had Uriah killed. Let's not miss that part of the story as well. And then Matthew starts to bring the genealogy to an end, and he writes, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was a mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Matthew so intentionally said, hey, my story, messy, imperfect, outcast, shoved in the corner by religious people. My story is throughout the story, the genealogy of Jesus. Don't ever, for one moment, ever believe or think that God can't or that God won't use your messy, imperfect story as part of His perfect story. Don't ever. Because Jesus' entire genealogy is filled with messy, imperfect people. And that's why He came. Approximately 7-8 years ago, I had only been here maybe a year and a half. And I had a very small group of people together. We were working on an initiative, a leadership initiative. And one of my friends, his name was Mark. I was just getting to know Mark. And he's a phenomenal leader and such an encourager and been such a strength to me. He showed up to this meeting. And like I said, I was just getting to know him. And he showed up and he's like, hey, Chris, I gotta share something with you. And he starts laying out the story where someone that he knew was, I think it was like a Goodwill in Punxsutawney, and they had just purchased a used book that was on the shelf, a used book on the shelf. They got the book home. When they got the book home, they opened the book up, and inside this book was this newspaper article, this clipping. And they started to read this newspaper article, this clipping, and they're like, oh, I got to give this to someone. So they gave it to Mark, and Mark's like, Chris, you got to read this. Now, let me share a couple really important insights to this newspaper story. First of all, close in the forefront of the picture is the founding pastor, Dave Bish. But this was years before a small group of people came together, even with the vision of Tri-County Church. This is years before that moment happened. The idea of Tri-County Church wasn't even around at this moment. Maybe little murmurings, but again, that small group hadn't come together to look for a pastor. This is years before this. Dave, at this point, was teaching a creative arts class at a junior high school. He was a teacher. But the title of the article simply says, Teacher Trades Classroom for Pulpit. He had this stirring that he was not supposed to be a teacher, that he was going to go be a pastor. So he was leaving being a full-time teacher to go back to seminary. Again, this is years before Tri-County Church, the vision, even remotely surfaced. The first line of the article just captured my attention. This is what the journalist wrote. Dave Bish has read French existentialist Albert Camus, occasionally enjoys rock music, and hates the word religion. This journalist starts to tell the story between Dave's love for teaching, but this kind of leading to become a pastor. In the middle of it, Dave literally says this. He goes, I want to lead as someone willing to serve, which is just the foundation of the church. For the spiritual leaders to serve, because that's what Jesus modeled. But the moment that sent chills up and down my spine, and to this day when I read these words, again, remember, this is years before Tri-County Church. This is what Dave said. Christianity has taken a bad rap, partly because of the media. Being Christian has been portrayed as a feel-good, pie-in-the-sky sanctuary from all problems. But real Christianity is rain, stuck cars, and mud. But in the face of adversity, Christianity offers the hope and salvation, and that's the difference. You see, the church is a space for healing and hope. For rain, stuck cars, and mud. The church, the vehicle God sent in motion through Jesus, reflects Jesus. I mean, just think about the genealogy. It's filled with messy, imperfect storylines. Stories like mine. Stories like you. It is why what God is doing in and through His church is so critical. The question is, will you choose to be a part of what God is doing? I say over and over again that God is on the move, because He is. Are you joining Him? Our mission kind of statement as a church is reaching people, changing lives, and impacting communities. It's just a different way of quoting Jesus found in Matthew 28, where Jesus said, hey, go, and make disciples. That phrase, make disciples, is predicated on someone who doesn't know Jesus, and now you introduce them to Jesus, you share the story of Jesus with someone, and then you walk with them, teaching them, obeying them. That's reaching people, changing lives, impacting communities. We're a church that passionately runs after the one. Jesus told a story about leaving the 99 to go find the one. And I just want you to know, that's who we are. If you ever wonder why we do what we do, if you're listening to a song or you see a video or you see an event and you think to yourself, what? They're a church. Why are they singing? Why are they? I just want you to know. The answer, 99.999% of the time, is because we are passionate about going after the one who doesn't know Jesus, the one who's walked away from God, the one who doesn't want to be part of church, the one who is angry, the one who is confused, the one who is lost. We are just all about reaching the every one. Why? Because Jesus said, go and make disciples, which means go find people who don't know Jesus and introduce them to Jesus and walk with them and share with them about who Jesus truly is, and along the way, help them to grow as a Christ follower. But it starts with the people who don't know Jesus. We're passionate about the one. Why? Because Jesus gave His life for the every one. In changing lives. I can't change your life spiritually. It's one of those areas where I think the church has gotten it wrong, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I don't know. But all of a sudden the church has kind of taken on this mantle. It's our job to grow you spiritually. But here's the thing, you can't find that in the Bible. I can't grow you spiritually. I can't change your life. All I can do is kind of like a coach. I can help. I can teach. I can show the playbook. But you have to choose to get off the bench, step on the field, and actually run the play. And so we do everything we can to try to help create a space so that people can grow, can change their lives for the good, for Jesus, which is a constant pursuit, but you have to want to. Jesus said that he came so that we could experience life to the full. That's the changing lives part. And that's why God wants you to use your story to walk beside other people as they grow. If you want to grow spiritually, if you want changed lives within yourself, then you walk with someone and help them, coach them, teach them, lead them, pray for them. Empty yourself into them. And then impacting communities. It's why we're a bright light. In the book of Revelation, chapters 2 and 3, it gives this image that churches have a lampstand on the outside, and that God will either leave that lampstand in place or he will remove it. And we're just passionate about being a church that's a bright light. The brighter light, the better. How do we serve our communities? How do we love on our communities? How do we partner in our communities? And I would just say, it's wherever you go that you have an opportunity to love first. Whether that's at your job, the business you own, your kids playing sports, helping out, serving schools, wherever that is. As we go, we want to love first. That's being a bright light. So here's my encouragement for all of us. Let's amp up the intensity and let's go. We all have one life to live. I know my life has radically been changed because of Jesus. It's why I have committed my entire life to helping lead and serve the local church, to equip more people, to encourage more people, to passionately breathe into more people to say, come on, let's go. Let's be on mission with God, with his vehicle, his church. Let's put love into action. Let's reach more people. The one. Let's help be a catalyst to change more lives. And let's impact our local communities. How? By how Jesus lived. By loving, by living, and by leading like Jesus. Let's go. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I just pray that this passion, this excitement won't die down, but it'll just get more intense. That we'll race after the one who desperately needs to know about you. That we'll passionately pursue the one so that they know that there's love, that this is a place of healing and hope. Lord, I pray that we're committed for our own spiritual lives to change, to grow, to deepen, to widen, to be stretched. Lord, I pray that we'll never lose sight of the impact that the church has to have in every one of our local communities. Lord, thank you for choosing messy and perfect people like us to be part of your perfect story. In your name I pray. Amen.